Thank you very much for your attendance today. Today's broadcast will be completed in English as a courtesy to our guests. We are very honored to host Professor Tomii in the last of a series of talks she has been given in the past few days for the Mexican audience. Today's talk will be an anatomy of the wilderness in Japanese art in the 60s. We also count with the presence of several members of the Permanent Research Seminar on Art and Culture, Mexico-Japan, as well as the Vice Director of Japan Foundation in Mexico, Marisato. Welcome to you all. Today's dynamic will be as follows. First, Marisato will take the floor. Then our coordinator, Amadis Ross, will briefly introduce our seminar. And then Professor Tomii will begin her presentation. At the end, we will open the Q&A session for the members of the seminar and then for the general public. Marisato, you may begin.
Yes. Hi, good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Japan Foundation Mexico, it's a great pleasure for me to be here, welcoming you all to this conference and panel discussion, an event organized in collaboration with Mexico-Japan Art and Culture Research Seminar from sending the app. I would also like to thank the National Art Center for joining our efforts to broadcast this conference through their digital channels. Finally, I would like to thank PhD Reiko Tomii sensei, whom the last couple of weeks has been sharing her knowledge and life passion with all the Mexican audience, 1960s Japanese art. In case you haven't heard about the Japan Foundation before, we are a governmental organization of Japan that creates global opportunities to foster friendship, trust, and mutual understanding through the culture, language, and dialogue. We are very excited to host today's event that will not only allow Reiko Sensei to share with us a wide view and context of the 1960s radical art scene in Japan, but also will enable dialogue to take place between PhD Tomii Sensei and academics that research Mexico-Japan art and their cultural resonances. As Japan Foundation in Mexico Deputy Director, I'm looking forward to hearing the conversation and to learn from all the participants. I hope that Reiko Tomii's conferences will shed some light on our understanding of 60s Japanese art in a global context, and that her methodology can be an inspiration for young scholars and researchers to study the local art and keep contributing to the study of multiple modernisms. Thank you all for watching. Remember that this and PhD Tomii's lectures that are part of her virtual tour in Mexico will be available with subtitles on our YouTube channel for everyone to watch. Thank you and enjoy the conversation.
Thank you very much. Now, Amadis Ross, the General Coordinator of the seminar, will take the word, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. Good afternoon. As Isabel said, my name is Amadis Ross, General Coordinator of the Mexico-Japan Art and Culture Permanent Research Seminar. I would like to welcome PhD Reiko Tomii Sensei. It means a lot to us that you have agreed to present a lecture and then engage us in conversation. Thank you for this opportunity. I am sure that the topics that will be discussed this afternoon will open new paths among our study group and will nurture the public's interest in contemporary Japanese art. I would like to thank the Fundación Japón de México, that's the name in Spanish, for taking care of this event, make it possible, and Canal 23 and the authorities of the Centro Nacional de las Artes for providing this space and the live transmission. Thank you all. Before giving the floor back to my colleague, Isabel, I want to talk very, very briefly about the seminar. Founded in 2019, it is a multidisciplinary academic collective focused on the points of intersection between Mexican and Japanese art and culture. We believe that comparative studies enhance local visions, open new perspectives, and strengthens ties between peoples and worldviews. One might think that countries like ours have very little in common, and that it will be better to focus on nations that are geographically and culturally close. But we are convinced that both Mexico and Japan will learn a lot if they look at each other more often. We need to pay more attention because there is a treasure hidden in plain sight. Maybe, just maybe, we are too focused in the Western capitals of symbolic political and economic power. This conditions our vision and forces us to think that there are no different routes. But indeed, other world is possible. Nations like ours, traditionally seen as minor, peripheral, or irrelevant by Western hegemonic thinking, are obliged to reconsider their frames of reference, epistemologies, and even conceptual definitions on subjects of great depth, such as art, education, or culture. To strengthen this process, it is necessary, first of all, to know in detail our own history and our own cultural expressions, as well as those of countries that share the search for a new self-understanding. Hence, the importance of this discussion, as PhD Tomii is an internationally recognized expert, and Japanese contemporary art is a rather little-known subject among Mexican scholars. We are very happy to have you here, Dr. Tomii, and we hope you enjoy this exchange as much as we surely do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amadis. Before starting the presentation, I will tell you a bit about Professor Tomii. Tomii Reiko is an independent scholar and curator specializing in post-war Japanese art history. Having received a PhD in post-war American art history from the University of Texas, she worked at the Center for International Contemporary Art, CICA, where her first project involved organizing a personal archive of Kusama Yayoi for CICA inaugural exhibition, Kusama's first retrospective in the US in 1989, for which Tomii collaborated with Alessandra Monroe, beginning with her collaboration with Monroe on the book publication in conjunction with Monroe acclaimed exhibition, Japanese Art After 1945, Screen Against the Sky. She focused on post-war Japanese art history. Since 1992, in her independent capacity, she has worked with numerous institutions and scholars. Curatorially, she worked with Queen's Museum in New York for global conceptualism, Tate Modern in London for Century City, and Getty Research Institute for Art, Anti-Art, Non-Art, among many others. In 2003, co-founded Ponya Genkon, a scholarly listserv with Miwako Tezuka. Her first monograph, this very beautiful book, great book, I recommend to you all, Radicalism in the Wilderness, International Contemporaneity and the 1960s Art in Japan, was published by the Mid Press in 2016. For the past few years, prior to the pandemic, she has traveled to lecture in Beijing, Seoul, Singapore, and Australia, in addition to cities in the US and Europe. In 2020, Professor Tomii received the Commissioner for Cultural Affairs Award from the Japanese government for her contributions in international cultural exchange. Without further ado, Professor Tomii, you might begin your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the your kind introduction, and I feel very honored to be here, invited to talk to all of you. Let me just begin. As I have demonstrated in my recent book, Radicalism in the Wilderness, International Contemporaneity and 60s Art in Japan, resonance, together with connections, characterizes the international contemporaneity or kokusai teki dojise of the post-war decades. Resonance is a keyword in the study of post-war art, pointing to the growing occurrences of similar practices found around the same time across geographical boundaries, even when there are no evident connections, that is, interpersonal and informational knowledge among practitioners. In 60s Japan, the sense of international contemporaneity underscored the newly emerging practice of gendai bijutsu, which literally means contemporary art, that anticipated today's contemporary art worldwide. My book was centered on the work by three practitioners, Matsuzawa Yutaka, the play, and Gan, whom I have discussed in my book. They assume conscious distance. They assume conscious distance from the mainstream art world, and thus exemplify the wilderness aspect of 60s art in Japan. In doing so, I would like to prepare ourselves for larger discussion in world art history. Granted, it is always important to add hitherto unknown practices from the Northwest to a world map of modernism. But if we are to be content with merely adding more, it is tantamount to building a Weberian encyclopedia of information. If instead we are to uphold the decentered view of multiple modernisms, the history of our discipline, art history, tells us that addition is not enough, especially not enough to dismantle the entrenched Eurocentrism in the field of art history. What we need to conceptualize is a new way to narrate the world history of post-war art while embracing multiplicity. Our mission is to devise a more dynamic, multivalent way to look at it. And I have proposed a methodology in my book, introducing a set of concepts built on a geohistorical understanding of contemporaneity in the sense of being contemporaneous. In this proposed methodology, decentering must be followed by amplifying and regrouping similar yet dissimilar contemporaneous practices in a spectrum. Ultimately, we will have a number of such spectrums to reimagine the history of multiple modernisms. In essence, it is a bottom-up and periphery-in methodology, as opposed to the Eurocentric top-down, center-out conception. That is to say, to build a narrative from bottom-up, our starting point is not so much global as local. The precision of global narrative depends on the precision of our understanding of the local. It may sound contradictory, but I cannot emphasize enough that the more global we want to be in our investigation, the more local we need to be in our attention. If so, it goes without saying that to achieve a truly global scale, this methodology in reality requires more than one set of knowledge and one specialist, making collaboration necessary. Today's talk and discussion to follow it, I believe, is precisely to generate a potential platform for that kind of collaboration. For similar yet dissimilar practices to be amplified and regrouped, we, the specialists, also have to be regrouped. With this in mind, my talk will concentrate on the local in preparation for further global discussion beyond this evening. I will first introduce you to the work of these three practitioners, whose radicalism, I believe, stands out in the global context. The oldest in age among the three practitioners, Matsuzawa Yutaka, was a pioneer conceptualist who made a complete break from the materiality of art in 1964 in favor of mobilizing the mental faculty in the viewer as the foundation of his immaterial art. His experiences in World War II as a college student shaped his outlook of the world, and he made it his lifelong mission to express the invisible, first in architecture, the subject he was studying at Waseda University in Tokyo. In 1948, he gave up architecture and moved back from Tokyo to his hometown Shimosuwa in central Japan, where he began experimenting with poetry and art in order to express the invisible, ultimately in an invisible manner. His progress was slow, but by 1961, his signature theory of psi began to take concrete forms, and he made his first text-based work of art in that year. In 1964, he established vanishing of matter as the core principle of his anti-civilization project by activating the viewer's mind to see the invisible, such as non-sensory painting, with his or her mind's eye. The foundational concept was kannen, which means meditative visualization in Pure Land Buddhism, an idea in modern philosophy. Having been convinced that the modern civilization was a vast mistake, bringing humankind to the brink of extinction through 2 world wars, he diligently sought to invent an alternative form of civilization, which he called anti-civilization, with immateriality as an ultimate method. The intellectual underpinning of his immaterialism were parascience, primarily parapsychology, science, contemporary physics such as quantum mechanics and astrophysics, and non-Zen Buddhism. By adapting the immaterial method of kannen, he not only rejected the material foundation of the work of art, he also reconceptualized his work as apparatuses to activate the viewer's mind. Text he used in his works became operation manuals of thought, that is, the instruction about how to use these novel apparatuses and how to use your mind. Then, the gallery space as such became a container, and thus another kind of apparatuses to contain smaller apparatuses, or in some instances, the empty gallery alone could serve as his apparatuses. He further eschewed the idea of ownership of the work of art. This became possible because the work of art is now liberated from materiality and thus can be freely experienced by the mind-exercising viewer. It thus becomes possible for each and every human being to experience and possess his art, such as foundational painting called White Circle. Okay, my slide is not in sync. This is about the reject the ownership. This was a complete makeover of what art could be. In other words, the significance of Matsuzawa's conceptualism constituted a twofold critique of humankind and its civilization as a whole, and a critique of the institution of art. The radicalism of his art of kannen was such that by 1966, he hypothesized vanishing of humankind, the date of which he eventually set in 2022. A visionary dimension of his conceptualism ultimately brought him to the stage of engaging the entire universe, that is, life forms on other planets. Generationally, the second oldest is the play, a collective of happeners, a terminology for those who practice happenings, founded in 1967 in the Osaka area. The play emerged toward the end of the radical 60s, which in Japan was jump-started by Gutai in the mid-50s and followed by two tendencies of anti-art, hangeijutsu, and non-art, higeijutsu, in the 1960s. Performance art was a major development of this decade, encompassing those more conceptually oriented, as represented by Highlight Center, and those more body-based, as represented by Zero Dimension. These artists staged their performances primarily in urban space, especially on the street, manifesting varying degrees of anarchist aspiration against the background of a politically volatile social climate. The play's activities in their first 2 decades, from 1967 to 1986, are summarized in the chronology on screen. Voyage happening in an egg of 1968, their first collective foray into landscape set their future direction. The group undertook one summer project annually, formulated through an often year-long discussion and preparation by the members, which included a sizable number of non-artists. The idea of voyage or travel into landscape was paramount. In this chronology, the projects shaded in dark green ostensibly feature voyages into landscape. For example, Current of Contemporary Art of 69, Ship of 1970, and Ie, which means a house, of 1972 were all journeys from Kyoto to Osaka along the river. In addition, the projects in pale green encompass the significant aspects of voyage that takes them away from mundane reality. As with Thunder of 1977, annually repeated through 86, Thunder was staged on a mountaintop near Kyoto for a month every summer in order to foreground the time away from everyday existence. Eschewing urban space, the play were committed to landscapes near and far. They made voyage in an ocean, through rivers, to mountains, in a lake, on a remote island, and to other wildernesses. In Wind of 76, they visited the barren northern landscape of Sarobetsu, Hokkaido, where they walked against the wind for full 5 days. Often trekking up and down hills, thickly covered by striped bamboos. Their preference of landscape imbued their activity with an earthwork dimension, both in scale and spirit, incorporating natural elements. Their love of nature was informed by its infinite time and space. Unlike the extremely political anti-art practitioners, anti-expo practitioners in the late 60s, the play tended toward latent politics of the everyday, through which, in their words, they aspire to probe people's everyday life with farmer-like persistence. In a way, the play engaged the flip side of 60s Japan, where the high economic growth enabled the mass modernization of everyday life, in which comfort bred complacency. Unlike the subversive anti-art, anti-expo performances, the play was in principle law-abiding, if only on surface. Above all, the group was not hostile to the general public, and they often collaborated with people outside the art world, as with their first voyage, which engaged a fisherman's union, a prefecture fishery station, and an oceanographer. However, their social compliance should not be mistaken as artistic compliance. Through their self-financed activities, they sought no reward other than perhaps occasional publicity in the mass media. Their work thoroughly defied the conventions of art. If the play took advantage of temperate climate and diverse landscapes in the Kyoto-Osaka region, Gan, also founded in 1967, had to contend with their residence in the backbone of Japan, burdened by a harsh winter weather. Short for Group Ultra Niigata, Gan was the youngest among the 3 practitioners and the first vanguard collective hailing from Niigata. From the beginning, they had a clear intention of generating an vanguard movement and closing their gap from the center, that is Tokyo. Yet, they exhausted their resources after presenting 5 exhibitions and 2 happening shows in Tokyo, in green here, and in Niigata, colored in blue, in the short space of 1 year. The group received some attention with their activism, but even though their works were competent, in line with the dominant trend of tricky art, they soon hit creative impasse. After the first year, no longer able to continue as an exhibition society, they decided to mount individual effort under the banner of GAN. Especially from 1969 onward, two central members, Horikawa Michio and Maeyama Tadashi, began to look more closely at their locale and found concrete realities to work with, while adapting the repertories of contemporary art strategies, such as mail art, land art, and political art. In doing so, they successfully reduced the distance not only from Tokyo, but from a larger world. Important geographical markers are the city of Tokamachi, the Shinano River, and Sado Island. Of three, Tokamachi was where Horikawa resided at the time, and the Shinano River provided him with stones to initiate his series, Mail Art, by sending stones in July 1969. The Mail Art project was inspired by the Apollo 11 mission that made the first moon landing. The mailing not only reduced the distance between Niigata and Tokyo, but it represented a kind of political statement, not unlike the stones thrown at the police by student radicals, prompting the recipients to think of earthly matters. As part of the series, in December 1969, he mailed a stone to President Nixon as a Christmas present, as a lone anti-war message. The same two geographical markers, Tokamachi and Shinano River, are involved in their memorable land art project in February 1970, an event to change the image of snow. With a titanic ambition, Gan painted a colorful abstraction on the snow-covered dry riverbed of the Shinano River in Tokamachi with a pesticide sprayer and a massive amount of color pigment donated by a chemical company in Tokyo. In the region known for the heaviest snow in Japan, the snowfield with yet more falling snow represented less a joyous playground than a reminder of the burden such severe weather brought to everyday life. Hence, the title of the project, referring to their hope to transform the landscape of hardship into an occasion to present surprise for local residents. Although in reality, the gorgeous color-filled abstraction they created was eclipsed by the constantly falling snow within 30 minutes. The third and last marker is Sado Island, which hosts a local post of Japan's self-defense forces. In the politically volatile days of 1969, the base on the island became the stage of an anti-military protest of Konishi Makoto, a 21-year-old airman and radar specialist who in essence contested the constitutionality of self-defense force. As this incident was tried in the regional court in Niigata, the locale of Niigata became a political battleground, which politicized both Maeyama and Horikawa. As GAN, they formed Postal Mailing Front, a kind of mail art network for activists nationwide. As the main activities of Postal Mailing Front, they offered Maeyama's anti-war stickers for camaraderie and called for 0-yen mailing as a way to shoot paper ballots at Prime Minister Sato Eisaku. To facilitate daily guerrilla acts, GAN issued a 0-yen stamp designed by Horikawa. So the face on the stamp is Sato Eisaku. I characterize these manifestations of inventiveness and imaginations as wilderness in my book. The most obvious feature of the wilderness is remote landscape. But in my study, wilderness is more than no man's land. It has several layers of meaning with the connotation of out there. Above all these three practitioners were out there geographically, meaning outside of Tokyo. Matsuzawa lived in Shimosuwa in central Japan, marked by number 15. Gan, as its name demonstrates, hailed from Niigata. You can see 10 and 11. And the play was group based in Osaka, Osaka area, lots of dots, so you can see there. In this sense, their activities in the wilderness signify regionalism. Their expressions are also out there or outside the norms in thinking in art or everyday life. Matsuzawa's immaterialism, the praise voyage into landscape, and Gan's snow painting, stone mailing, and postal mailing front all embodied their thinking that is out there. Their out there status also put them outside the metropolitan culture of the avant-garde, such as Highlight Center, and more importantly, put them outside the mainstreaming state of contemporary art, as represented by Monoha. In these contexts, it is important to understand what happened after January 1964, when the Yomiuri newspaper company announced the termination of its annual Yomiuri Independent Exhibition, which had served as the almost only institutional site for the avant-garde. During the post-Yomiuri years, contrary to the vanguard artist's sense of loss, contemporary art gained a considerable presence in the mainstream art world and became a force to reckon with. In spirit and expression, our three wilderness practitioners bring in another layer of meaning, wilderness as out of the sheet of power. This is a historical layer of wilderness, or koya in Japanese, koya in ya. In koya stands for being outside of sheet of power, either by circumstance or by choice, in the traditional East Asian vocabulary. In China, politicians descend to the wilderness, xie, when they lose their positions in the court and the government. Literati painting was part of this tradition, with scholar painter withdrawing from the seat of power to critique the officially sanctioned academic painting. In modern Japan, being in the wilderness, Zaya, gained a positive connotation of not participating in the institutional system, whether the government, corporations, the art establishment, or academia. That is to say, wilderness in East Asian tradition signifies an alternative to the mainstream and the establishment. Specifically, our three protagonists offered alternatives to a mainstreaming contemporary art represented by Gutai and Monoha. To recap, these are the aspects of the wilderness in 60s Japan. Among the works by our three practitioners, one that most saliently epitomizes the wilderness is Matsuzawa Yutaka's independent work of 64, Independent 64 in the Wilderness. It is this work that inspired me to think of the wilderness in the context of post-war art. Since Matsuzawa's work is text-based, let us read this one. It begins with his credo: don't believe matter, don't believe senses, don't believe the eye. They are very radical coming from a visual artist, even eschewing the, your eyesight. It's followed by the exhibition detail as outlined in this call for entry for this exhibition, placed as an ad in an art magazine. Site is Tundra Field, Nanashima Yashima Highland of Nagano Prefecture. Period is before daybreak, December 3 to before daybreak, December 9. Installation and the installation dates are past, present, future, and entry fee is none. Matsuzawa's radicalism or strangeness continues. The location is not fictional, but an actual place. The national designated treasure, nature treasure, Yashima Highland, you can see in the color, which is echoed in the art. The most astounding is the entry method. Please keep your entry in your hand and deliver the formless emission from it, imaginary work, to the exhibition site. Any delivery method will do. It is very likely the site will be filled with many bizarre, formless things of new, making the exhibition a rare, merry occasion. Those who wish to enter may start contacting immaterial or immaterial ways. The work exemplifies not merely a situation these artists were in, but wilderness as method, which consists of the use of desolate landscape away from Tokyo, the application of such out there ideas as an immaterial exhibition and communication method that may include telepathy. His upholding of the idea of independent exhibition as a free forum and his embrace of the do-it-yourself tradition of Japanese modernism in rejection of the authority and the institution. As such, this work is an icon of the wilderness. Thank you very much. This is the end of my lecture today.
Well, I think this is, if anyone else has anything to say, I think this is the end of the transmission. Thank you very much, everyone. And thank you to the audience also.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.